There's some noise coming from someone's mic. I wonder, it might be good to start with mute. We've been doing a virtual seminar series on fintech. So that's sort of finance and technology. And every Friday we do these, and it's interesting. The time is on the hour, and then it takes like 2 minutes for everybody to log on. And so we always start at 2 minutes past the hour.
And are they always on fintech? Is that or does the topic change every week?
So we have a standing series on fintech, and it's been very popular.
Oh, wow.
But then we've done others that have been broader. So for example, initially there was conversation about should the markets close down? And I had 5 former SEC economists come and debate that issues. What should we do with the financial markets? We did another interesting one on what do you do with your portfolio? This was when the markets were really volatile.
Wow. Yeah. So, Professor, what do you do with your portfolio?
Geez. I'm a believer in diversification.
Awesome. I think we want to give it 1 more minute and then we can get started if that works for everybody. Thank you. All right, good morning, good afternoon, wherever everybody is. Greetings from the hilltop. Welcome to today's webinar, Global Perspectives on COVID-19 Across Industries, sponsored by Georgetown McDonough's Office of Alumni Relations. We're so glad to have you on the line. Thank you for taking time out of your workday to connect virtually with us. My name is Lauren Apicella, and I'm Associate Director of Alumni Relations for Georgetown McDonough, and I'll be helping to facilitate today's webinar. Before we get started, I would like to share a few tips and reminders. This broadcast is being recorded. The recording of this webinar will be made available on our website in the next few days, and you'll receive the link to the recording in a follow-up email, which will also contain a post-webinar survey for you to take, information on upcoming webinars, and more ways to stay connected to Georgetown McDonough. Our panelists will take questions throughout the webinar. If you are interested in submitting a question, please send it in as you have them using the Q&A function at the bottom of the Zoom screen. And if you're having any technical difficulties or other issues, please submit those concerns to me via the Q&A function at the bottom of the screen as well. Today's webinar is moderated by Reena Agarwal, Robert E. McDonough Professor of Finance and Director of Georgetown's Center for Financial Markets and Policy. Joining Professor Agarwal today are Marcelo Liu, President of BASF Canada and a 2003 graduate of the School of Foreign Service. Hitesh Barwani, co-founder of the Canmo Group and a 2003 graduate of the McDonough School of Business. David Gold, President of Hisense Americas and a 2004 graduate of the McDonough School of Business. Sissy Freeman, Sales and Marketing Director for Granado Farmacias and a 2003 graduate of the School of Foreign Service. And Henrik Lund, Director of Knowit and a 2001 graduate of the School of Foreign Service. Now, without further ado, I'm pleased to turn things over to Professor Agarwal for our panel. Thank you.
Okay, unmute. Lauren, thank you so much for organizing the panel, and thank you to Ashley on your team for putting this together. We have an amazing panel here today, and what struck me is it's just so diverse, right? It's diverse in terms of the industries that you represent. It's diverse in terms of the geographic location where you are. So I'm in the 10 a.m. time zone, and we have our panelists spread out over the time zones all the way to 10 p.m. in the time zones. I'm going to ask our panelists maybe to start off with just tell us a little bit about your own background and where you are and what you are doing. Whoever wants to start, please go ahead. David, you're on top of my screen. Do you want to go first?
Sure. Thank you, Lauren and Professor Agarwal for organizing and inviting. My name is David Gold. I am the president of Hisense Americas. I graduated from Georgetown McDonough School of Business in 2004. I studied finance and accounting. And after Georgetown, I did my MBA, went to MIT Sloan. And after that, I joined and started Hisense operations in Mexico. Hisense is a Chinese electronics manufacturer. We're about a $20 billion company. And over the last 10 years, I've helped Hisense grow in Mexico and the United States to become one of our the leading brands right now in the TV and home appliance space. And very honored to be here. Thank you.
Sissy, you are next on my screen if you want to go next.
Sure. Hi, everyone. Thank you. I'm really happy to be here. My name is Sissy. I'm calling in from Brazil. Many of you don't know Granado, but Granado is one of Brazil's most traditional cosmetics companies. This year, we celebrate 150 years. I graduated from Georgetown in 2003 from the School of Foreign Service. I studied political economy at Georgetown, and my major was political economy. After I graduated, I moved to New York. I lived for a couple of years, and I came back to Brazil to work at Granado because my father had purchased the company from the Granado family. So I've been working at the company since 2004, 2005. And I'm currently marketing and sales director. And we have, we produce all of our products, but 75% of our business is wholesale and 25% of our business is retail, because we have about 80 stores, mostly in Brazil, but we also have a small operation in France. So I'm glad to be here and share some of the experience with you guys.
Great. Henrik.
Thank you, Professor, and hi, everybody. I'm Henrik. I graduated SFS in 2001, and it's great to be back on the hilltop, albeit virtually this time. I'm a director at Knowit, which is a IT consultancy, a tech consultancy in the Nordics, about 2,400 employees all across the Nordics. And I'm also chair of an environmental nonprofit, and I've been working since I graduated, both in the nonprofit space as well as the private sector space. And I've also been chair or chief of staff for the former president of Costa Rica back in the day. Excited to be here, excited to discuss and talk about how this pandemic has affected us all across the world.
Thank you, Enrique. And Marcelo.
Yeah, thank you very much for setting up the panel, Professor Lauren. Great to be joined by some of my old really friends. Yeah, so Marcelo Lu, I'm president of BASF Canada. I graduated Georgetown 2003, School of Foreign Service, STIA program, Science, Technology, International Affairs. Right after Georgetown, or even during Georgetown, I started work at the World Bank. was part of the Doing Business report, which some of you may know. It's on regulatory competitiveness. Did that for 4 years, and then decided to go into the private sector, and took me from Washington, D.C. to a small city called Ludwigshafen in Germany, where I joined BASF. Used to make those cassette tapes, and for those that are a bit younger, then we do everything from vitamins all the way to oil and gas, albeit that is also now being carved off of the company. So been with the company in Germany, in Hong Kong, and now in Canada, almost 4.5 years. And here in Canada, we have about 1,200 employees and $2 billion worth of business. And happy to be here and share a bit of some of our experiences.
Great, great. And Hitesh?
Sorry. Thank you, Professor. It's such an honor to be here, and so nice to see so many old friends. So I graduated Georgetown in 2003. At that time, I was debating whether I do the investment banking route and work in New York, or whether I go back home to Singapore. So I went back home to Singapore and started working in the family business. At that time, I decided to start a consumer vertical for the family business. So today we have a consumer business in Indonesia, representing a whole host of leading brands from around the world. So everything from baby and maternity to luxury accessories. So brands under the group include brands like Mothercare, Early Learning Center, Coach, Kate Spade, Nespresso, Havaianas, a host of brands. We operate across channels. So we have approximately 300 brick and mortar stores in Indonesia. And we also operate several own brand websites. So we operate websites. We also operate airports. So the retail part of airports. So essentially we're relatively diversified across channels and across business categories in Indonesia. Have about 2,500 people working in the business in Indonesia. So very excited to be here and learn more about the responses of various businesses in
Okay, great. So I guess let's get to our topic. Here at Georgetown, when March happened, and this was right around spring break time, and COVID became a big issue, we had to think in terms of all kinds of things. How do we get classes online? How do we bring students back from study abroad, right? How do we empty out the dorms? Should we get kids coming back after spring break, or should we tell them go home? And if they go home straight, what do we do with the dorms and all their stuff? So higher ed was figuring out its own steps. I think our audience here is interested in hearing from you. Sort of describe what happened immediately with your organizations, your businesses. What were some of the immediate actions that you had to take? Please.
Maybe I can start, and then I think colleagues can join in. I mean, the immediate one, it's very clear. Once this became very known, I mean, the extent and the gravity of the situation, it was obviously a crisis management situation that we had. And the way that we've at least tried to structure this so that we can also communicate well to the employees, but also to the customers and stakeholders, was in three-level approach. One is we protect our employees at all costs. So that we need to do regardless of anything else. There must be a protection of the employees. That is with having people work from home, but also the ones that kept the plants running or the production running, that significant changes were made in the protocols of how we operate. That was one. The other one is protect our customers. So really have ears on the ground on what is happening. If the customers is going through some difficulties, even customers that maybe don't have access to PPE, we made those available as well, but also on the financial front, being able to adjust discussions there. And finally, the third one is really protect the company, protect BASF as well. There needs to be some change that we had to do on our operations, but to keep our brand, but also our products in line. So for sure, crisis management mode, and these were the three main areas where we plugged all the other activities that we were doing, be it on the community front, be it on the customer, be it on the families of employees. Many of these different programs we started, yeah.
I would agree, and just to add to that point, apart from that, since we have retail shops, we also, before it became obligatory, we decided to close down all of our shops mid-March because we didn't want our employees to feel that they weren't safe. And also we started a lot of campaigns of donations because the area where our factory is in people around there needed a lot of help. So we donated, since we produce soaps, we donated soaps that we would, for example, sell to hotels, and hotels were going to be closed. So we donated all of our stocks, and we started several campaigns and things like that. So and adopted, like Marcelo said, many new codes to the factory, because in the offices everyone was sent home, but in the factory, because our factories produce essential products for the pandemic, we started having to measure everyone's temperature, and if they're sick, they would have to be home for 2 weeks. In the cafeteria, having spacing, things that involve costs and change, but that definitely give employees the security to be working and feel safe.
So Sissy, how did you make the decision to close your shops, even though there was no regulatory requirement for it? Was it others were also doing it? Was it employees saying we don't want to come to work, or it was just management being proactive about it?
We were actually one of the first companies in Brazil to close down countrywide. We had been following the pandemic since January because a lot of our suppliers are from China, especially one of our best-selling products is a liquid soap. And so the pumps from the liquid soap come from China, and they obviously are also used for sanitizer. And so we started to notice that it was going to be probably a bigger problem than we had expected. Because we have our operations also in France, and we also have a partner that's Spanish, which is Puig. We had been following close with them. And one of the issues we have, which I guess is something that we're probably going to speak a little more forward, is Brazil's decision was for the decisions to be taken by city, basically by mayors, and it really makes things hard. But we felt that it was hard to choose one state versus another when you don't have a lot of information and people travel a lot, and our stores are mostly concentrated in Rio and Sao Paulo, which is where we have the biggest populations. And so we felt that once everyone in the office was sent home, that the stores would have to be treated in the same way, let's say, because it's kind of like choosing a son or choosing, who goes and who stays. And so we felt that it was just safer until we had enough information to just send everyone home.
So to echo some of the things said by Marcelo and Sissy, priority number one was our employees. And I guess we had the fortune from a Hisense perspective to be one of the early learners, I guess, of the virus and the seriousness of it due to the impact on our manufacturing in China. And that really has helped us a lot in protecting the safety of our employees around the world. We have manufacturing and R&D centers in Europe. And as the virus spread from Asia, going into Europe, and then from Europe into the Americas, we were able to implement a lot of procedures, both in our offices and in our factories, to ensure the safety of our employees, whether they're in our offices or on the factories. And then, as Marcelo said, our customers. Cash flow was a major concern for all companies immediately, day one. So we run into risk management mode to understand which customers do we need to work with, where do we see a higher risk, and making sure that we collect our receivables as quickly as possible. Probably one of the first lessons I've learned at Georgetown was never run out of money. So we really went into cash flow analysis to understand where we stood, and of course supporting our communities, supplying PPE, having access to reliable and quality PPE made out of China, and be able to send that to different communities where we operate around the world was huge and a big part of what we believe in. And then, you know, it really became a human crisis. And actually, one of the things that our leadership team told us as CEOs, you know, we need to step aside for a moment as CEOs and think about ourselves as parents right now. And every single employee is a family member right now, and we have to do what's best for them and their safety first. And that, I think, was very eye-opening to a lot of us, where we're so used to hitting monthly, quarterly, annual numbers. Put that aside for a moment and think about safety and welfare of our employees.
Yeah, I echoing a lot of what David said. For us in Indonesia, actually 2020 was coming along very nicely. You know, everything was we were hitting targets, everything was going fine, and there was a sense of complacency. Even though we saw the virus making inroads into Southeast Asia, you know, there was a sense of complacency even from the authorities in Indonesia, that much like what happened in 2003 with SARS, where Indonesia escaped relatively unhurt, we expected something similar to happen. And on March 3rd, when we had the first case declared, within a period of 2 or 3 weeks, it just snowballed. And, you know, the pace at which things happened, from the first case to when we had to shut all the stores, was just a blur. It was an absolute lightning speed. And completely unbelievable. And I think running a business, you know, we obviously stress test our business, and we stress test for, you know, 15, 20, 30% revenue falls. But I don't think anyone has stress tested the business for an 80 or 90% fall in revenue, where revenue drops close to zero. And especially when you have a business that's diversified across geographies and across categories, that's not something you build into your models. So it takes some time for even reality to sink in. And as soon as that happened, the first thing we did was work with the teams. And, you know, how do we get our safety protocols in place? How do we work on health and safety measures in our stores for whatever we're open? How do we protect the teams? And then beyond that, how do we work with the teams? You know, once we protect them physically, how do we protect them financially? And give them the reassurance that, listen, you know, there might be a little bit of pain ahead, but we are going to protect as many jobs as we possibly can. And then it was very much stakeholder management. So working with our banks, working with our principals, working with our suppliers, our service providers. I think communication was so important. And, you know, in an emerging market like Indonesia, where very often I think the government's focus is on, you know, the social, the healthcare network, businesses were very much left to fend on their own. So we were left to fend on their own. And as a result of that, I think our ecosystem of suppliers, of vendors, of teams, together to set up a stakeholder or a bank, it was more an expression of reassurance that we're there for each other and we'll get through this together. And I think that's what really brought it all together for us. And, you know, hopefully coming out the other side now, you see the ecosystem being much tighter and more trust being formed.
So it's interesting to hear all my fellow alums and good friends talk about this from this perspective, because from the tech industry and consultants industry, it was a very different reality, right? I mean, the pressure on our consultants, I mean, has increased by 20, 30, 40, 50%, except for the few who work with clients in the travel industry. all of the other industries that we're exposed towards really have become more interested in digitalization, more interested in what tech can bring to them, and more interested in what we as a company and our competitors and our industry can bring. So although we, here everything stopped on the 12th of March, we all went home to our home offices and I've been working there more or less ever since. In terms of work, the work didn't disappear. In fact, if anything, there was more of it. So it's a very different perspective. Of course, we were lucky in terms of that the Norwegian government has been their policies have been fairly successful in both stagnating the pandemic, but also in helping the different businesses get through this crisis. So from our perspective, it's obviously a challenge, and we have to focus much more on our employees and that perspective, which I think across the board, where you really have to communicate more with your colleagues. You have to, as David said, really focus on being a parent first. For here also schools closed, right? So everybody, I have great pitches where 4-year-olds have been introduced as part of the pitch, right? And we've all seen these videos. So that is, I think, a very different perspective from here compared to those who were more on the retail side and towards the end consumer as well.
Yeah, I can, definitely relate to your point, Henrik, in terms of when at Georgetown, all our classes moved online, right? We have our tech people who had to work, they worked like crazy to make all of that happen, to take it all virtual and help the faculty, help the students to, so there was a lot of work that had to be done on the technology side, in addition to sort of the safety side. I want to go back a little bit to several of you mentioned this. David called it, we had to be parents, and Hitesh was talking about communication with employees and other stakeholders became even more important. And it's not just the health of, it's not just the safety in factories, but just sort of health more broadly, right? The 4-year-old who's going to be there on Zoom meetings. And what we found was, initially everyone was like gung-ho, this is what has to be done, let's do it. But after a while, fatigue has kicked in, and people are finding they still have to do a job. There's no childcare available, and I'm just curious to know, what are your organizations doing in terms of that kind of support for your employees, both on the communication side, but also the family situation, home situation, and the challenges there?
Yeah, if I can get that, I think a crisis by its definition, one would expect it to be short-lived, and but this wasn't just one crisis. This was a whole series of very long, a very long drawn crisis. So the effect on the mental health of a lot of our team members is something that we did not underestimate. They were balancing many roles. They were trying to protect their business. But at the same time, their kids were being homeschooled. It was very challenging for them to balance all of this work. And we were on Microsoft Teams calls while we had kids in the background, and very challenging to manage. So I think, again, it was about flexibility. And it was getting everyone to understand that and it was showing more empathy for them, and the fact that they had many roles, and each of these roles, whether as a parent or a child, or you had to balance these various roles and the demands that they placed. So it was really about having empathy for them, and whether it was more training that we did for them, and to help them balance the various aspects of their life. And to make them realize that it was okay to feel that stress, and that everyone was in the same boat with them. This wasn't unique to them, and this was unprecedented. So there was nothing bad about confronting that and sharing that with the rest of our colleagues.
Yeah, it's again,
One thing I'd also like, oh, sorry.
go ahead,
No,
Sissy.
one thing I'd also like to add that we were very strong was of giving people the sense of job security, because especially on the retail side, when you see so many people listening to the news and hearing that so many companies are closing down, one of the things we did was always, be transparent with our results during all the months, but also we adopted some of the government policies where people would get reduced salaries. But part of the, for example, one of the things we adopted was that the difference that they would get, we actually paid for that difference, so that net they would still receive the same amount at home, being at home, and didn't feel the sense of having to go back to work, or that the company was adopting the policy because we were having, huge financial problems. So we wanted to give them the security that we're doing this for the company as a whole, but, your job is here. We're here for you. And I think that also helped a lot, because they felt that, at least on that side, when everything is crazy, my company is solid, it's thinking of me, and I don't have that to worry about.
I think to build on that, probably the biggest job I had was communication. Constantly on the phone or on Zoom or on Teams, communicating across all levels of the company and throughout the entire organization. It was for many, many months just reassuring employees that yes, tough decisions will have to be made, no doubt about it, but that we're here as a community, we're here as a company to support as much as we can and reassure in our results. Henrik mentioned, for IT, obviously this was probably a boom. Similar case on our product lines for TVs, with more people working from home, TVs, the industry is up 25%. Refrigeration and home appliances are selling like crazy. So we had to continue to our daily jobs, but it was really about reassuring and displaying what Hitesh mentioned, empathy. We, both my wife and I work, so managing a dual income household, 3 young children, and understanding that this is not just happening to us, this is happening across the whole world to everybody. So, on call with vendors, on call with customers, you'll constantly see children. Understanding that this is just part of the new normal and letting people feel comfortable with that, and understanding that this is a period that we need to adjust to. So it's just communication at all levels of the company, vertically, horizontally, throughout the organization to just reassure people that we're there for them. And I think that was the biggest thing. And actually, probably from a culture and teamwork perspective, based on recent surveys that we've done in our company, it's never been higher. We have never achieved such a high cultural and high teamwork and collaboration as we have over the last few months.
Great. So I'm going to turn to the future a little bit, and what I'm going to ask chimes in with one of the questions we've gotten is, so what do you see in terms of the future? What have we learned from this pandemic and the way of doing business and the way of working that you think will continue in the future, and what changes will continue in the future?
Henrik, why don't you take that one first?
Thank you for that. At least from the Nordic space, I think that we're going to see much more flexibility. It's no longer going to be the case that you have to be in the office by 7 or 8 or 9 and work until 5. It's going to be much more of this work when you want to, as long as you deliver the results. I mean, for a consultancy company, it's fairly easy because you can just look at how many hours have you billed the client this week. But for also, I think more broadly, you will see this across industries. The biggest telecommunications company here said that they're going to continue with home offices forever. That's their new normal. I think you're going to find a little bit of a pushback from that over time, because I think now it's very good. Now it's very flexible. We don't have to run back to kindergarten or to school or to sit 2 hours commuting each way to work. But you also, over time, lose some of that team spirit. So I think right now, the new normal is still up for debate, but it's definitely going to be more flexible than it is today, at least for office workers.
Maybe I can take a step further. So I think what Henrik has described is the future of work. I think that flexibility is for sure there. There was a lot of hesitation before in a traditional company like BASF. When you talk about working from home, there were perceptions, valid or not valid, they were always there. But now people realize that it's definitely possible to be more flexible. And to your point about family being able to adapt, if schools are not back, then it's very difficult for a father or a mom to come back to work, depending on the responsibilities they have at the house. So from that perspective, for sure, future work is there. But if I take it more into the future of operations and really supply chain, I think there is something on the geopolitics side that is really has really started, yeah. And the trade barriers or trade discussions, as well as crisis, really showed a lot of interdependencies that some countries really, frankly, did not think that they had. So at least what we are observing is a lot of regionalization of production. I can say, of course, countries would like to produce everything by themselves, but what they are really wanting to avoid is these very long global supply chains and dependency on one country in specific. So that is for sure something that we are looking at. A lot of our products, as you can imagine, can go to very chemical ingredient level, and sometimes we would have a sole source of only one producer in a remote country that would be supplying this very important ingredient. And now there is really a dismantling of that and really trying to look for regional support. So as you can imagine, this will trigger quite a bit of, one is calling reindustrialization or really skipping a step and modernizing the plants back to the digitalization drive. We see a lot of customers now requesting support in integrating their, let's say, supply chain network with ours, so that it can trigger immediate kind of forecasting, which before is very difficult to do when you're talking on the phone, writing down numbers and putting on a spreadsheet. So that integration company to company, regional, is at least what we are observing as a trend at the moment. Yeah.
So Marcelo, just to push on that a little bit, so there are two things going on, right? There are at the government level, there are countries who are, they want to be more, they want to be less into globalization basically, right? And they want to do everything at the country level. But businesses are much more interested in that integration. And I'm just curious as to how is that tension affecting you? How are you managing that tension? Several of you have mentioned, right, you depend on getting material from another country, or you have, you're selling to different countries. So your operations are not just driven by one country or even one region. And how are you maneuvering that, and especially as you think what's happening longer term?
I'll answer very quickly because I think the other perspectives also would be interesting. But the way we are seeing is hedging, right? So there is a cost to hedging, but we need to make sure that we have parallel, let's say, options there. So back to the case, I mean, BASF is in 80 different countries with operations. So we need the world to be globalized so that we are efficient. But in that sense, within that global layer, we are also doing regional work.
and regionalization. So there is a drive for that as well.
You know, as a customer of BASF with manufacturing throughout the world, I concur with Marcelo's point. We are, you know, China used to be our largest manufacturing base, and that's definitely not going to be the case in the years to come. You're definitely seeing, even as a Chinese company, we're expanding our manufacturing way beyond China into Europe, into the Americas, into Southeast Asia. We definitely understand that even though there was an efficiency at the time to be had from a manufacturing perspective by sourcing everything from a single point, we realize now, and similar to what Hitesh was saying, from a stress test perspective, there are now new variables to put in place and to consider. So our priority now is to work, as Marcelo said, on a more regional basis, whereas we can. Now there's a new U.S., Mexico, Canada trade agreement. So we're looking at expanding manufacturing where it makes sense for that region. In Brazil, you know, there's still rules in place there to protect local manufacturing. So we're looking at manufacturing there, and then working with key customers. Definitely similar to what Marcelo said, the importance of a strong business partner has probably never been more important, because as you go through a crisis, you realize who are your stable partners and who are less stable, and who are there and will go that extra mile for you and have a much longer view on things. So definitely we see a permanent move to a much more of a regional play, as Marcelo said, and thinking of long-term changes that we're doing. This also includes a lot more of a long-term planning with our partners. So if a partner before would only commit to a 2 or 3 month forecast, now we're seeing it expand to 6 months and beyond, and putting in more sensitivities or variables in place, you know, for a certain period of time. But we realize now that the supply chain is more complex than it was before, and that requires a lot more planning.
So I'm a finance professor. I have to ask a financy question, right? Liquidity really dried up back in March, especially, and you had the central banks intervening in a big way. I'm just curious with your organizations, what was happening on the funding side? This is also a question that's coming from one of our alumni at access to capital markets, access to funding, liquidity issues, as we started off by saying, you know, cash is king in these times, and you want to make sure you don't run out of capital. Long term, you might be profitable, but you need that funding short term. What has your experience been so far? I mean, it's actually been amazing how well the capital markets have done.
Yeah, I was going to say, we really didn't have many issues. We've had a long-term relationship with our banks, and we obviously everything we had access to, we got just to at least as a safety, but it wasn't really an issue, and luckily it wasn't something that we had any problems with. I don't know if anyone else.
That's good.
I think I think for us, liquidity, I mean, cash definitely king. There's no question about that. You know, one of the first things we did is we sat down and we looked at our facilities, and we looked at the balance sheet, and we said, how long can we last? How long can we last on zero revenue? What is our runway on zero revenue, and what can we do to reduce the burn? And that's when we went to all of our stakeholders and we said, listen, you know, we see a road to say 20 or 25% of revenue, with even if all the stores are closed, using digital channels and innovating on channels. Over there, how do we just ensure that we can sustain the operating expenses of the business? Then after that, it was really working on financing, working with your banks, and showing them your business model, and showing them that, listen, you're not burning, and operationally you're profitable. It's more supply chain management that you need to take care of, and you need to clear out your supply chain. in terms of your incoming deliveries. So it was really working very closely with your banks and your partners. And it was at times like this where you realize the importance of being conservative, and you realize the importance of a strong balance sheet. Really came in very useful as we have had to weather the storm. We did not have an ability to tap very large government schemes, as has been prevalent in, say, developed markets like Singapore, like the United States, or even Western Europe. We are very much left on our own.
So are you concerned about a second wave coming, and how are you preparing for it? rather not, hopefully we won't have to worry about that.
On the retail side, we've invested a lot in, basically our structure used to be, well, during the pandemic, our online sales have increased about 1,000%. And obviously we don't believe it'll stay at that rate, but we do believe that we'll have a lot of gains for the second semester. But one of the things, Brazil is a very big country, and we basically just have the mail as the main logistics partner. And so one thing we have now done, and I think for the second wave or even for the future, people want the product the quicker the possible. And if stores are closed, it makes it harder. So we're actually now changing so that people can order directly from the store. We used to have the store pickup, but now also the store isn't just the pickup, but it goes from there to a local delivery service. And so that's one of the things that we've been doing to minimize the second wave, and also not only the second wave, but I think it's another way of using the stores across Brazil as hubs versus just one warehouse delivering to everyone.
So a quick comment on this one. Basically, I think it's very clear, at least from what I understand from a pandemic, is that there is a very high likelihood that you get second, third waves, or even small, let's say, hits. But what is very clear is that we must avoid at all costs future lockdowns. Yeah, what really triggered the lockdown is the uncertainty, and really made a lot of knee-jerk reactions, which I think at the time were very appropriate. But now we know a bit more of the virus. We know a bit more what are the preventive steps. So at least as a company, we are prepared for that. And I think, the experience that we had with the first wave really allows us to avoid any type of, having to, do a lockdown again. Yeah. Of course, we need the broader community to support that. But I think from that perspective, that is there. On the liquidity side, I would say personally, and this is not a company position, but at least if I observe a bit, how there's been money injected into the economy, and a lot of dependency now is on this support that the governments are making, especially in North America. If I see Canada, US, more broadly, is how do you descale that now that that dependency has now been set up? That is going to be a big one. And the stock market is a bit of a weird situation. I think it's people with cash or organizations with cash not knowing what to do with it, and then they put it into the stock market. But at one point, once all the filings for Q3, Q4 start coming in, and people see what the real results are, there may be adjustments done there. So there is some sizable risk coming into the end of the year and beginning of next year on the liquidity side, but also on just people being able to buy and purchase things. We need to be very cautious. Back to Hitesh's point and David's point on being resilient and stress testing this a bit.
And so each of you are operating in several countries, and you and employees at your organization must travel quite a bit. What's the future of business travel? This is in the future, it's a question that's coming from one of our alumni colleagues here also.
So, Henrik probably on the IT side can answer this better than anyone, but I think, as someone who would travel every week of the year, that's gone away for the most part. We're seeing that, face-to-face or virtual face-to-face meetings with customers have been very effective from a relationship perspective, as well as more efficient, of course, from a time management perspective. So I definitely see a decline in the amount of travel, at least for basic meetings, let's say, and a much bigger move towards virtual IT. I think that's definitely something that's going to be permanent for a while, and I've done a lot of reading on forming new habits, considering that we've been in this new normal for a long time now. And I definitely think these habits are going to stay with us. I think the digitalization is one. As Cece mentioned, e-commerce is another big one. Customers, especially throughout Central and South America, who before were not very comfortable of ordering through e-commerce, we're seeing that now because of a necessity, growing exponentially. And I think that's something that's here to stay. So building on e-commerce capabilities is fundamental, as well as the digitalization and making sure you have the right IT infrastructure to maintain communications.
If I might come in on that, David, I think that it's very true that the new normal is the video meeting. It breaks down also a lot of barriers because they're mostly from a home. So you become much more familiar with your client or your supplier because you're talking to each other from the kitchen or the living room. And on the same side, I think there are a lot of employees that are not going to be willing to travel because of the risks involved. So you're going to see corporate policies where they're saying, we can't force our employees to travel, especially cross borders. So there isn't really, I don't think we're going to get back to sending employees anywhere in 2020 for sure not. I think we're talking second half of 2021, maybe. It depends on when you feel that the video meetings are no longer meeting the necessary goals, and also to which case you're able to have somebody locally on the ground. Your local agent might become much more important, going a little bit back to how it was back in the day when it took 3 weeks to sail to America. It is because that combination of that video meeting and the local on the ground person, I think it's going to be much more prevalent than it has been in the past when it was, a quick hop across the Atlantic or across the Pacific.
Okay, we have just barely a few minutes left. My last question to you is briefly, any advice for Georgetown students currently from a professional career point of view?
So, I graduated undergrad in 2004. We were just on the other side of a crisis after 9/11. And then I graduated MIT in 2009, right after the crisis then with the Lehman Brothers collapse. And what I've seen, my advice is now more than ever, being entrepreneurial is probably a great opportunity. Echoing, Hitesh and his decision back at the time, to follow a traditional route and go into investment banking after graduating or go on his own path. I think entrepreneurial during a time of crisis is actually a fantastic opportunity. A lot of my classmates from MIT in 2009 went into small, no-name tech companies that have become now stable, known brands and products. And, at the time, a lot of people, those who had gotten through the traditional path, when I said, what are you doing? Where are you going? Why are you doing that? And now, they're the ones going after them for new business. and opportunities. So definitely do not be reluctant to go sort of under the non-traditional path or the more entrepreneurial path in a time of crisis when it's probably a good time to do it.
Yeah, my advice would be never waste a good crisis. I mean, just like every other crisis, this too will pass. And we've seen so much innovation that's taken place in this crisis, and how businesses have adapted. In the midst of all this creative destruction, there is so much opportunity that one can focus on. And you know, whether it's new channels, new products, they're entirely new categories of businesses that are being created. So it's, you know, if the glass is half full, it's an exciting time.
Okay, well, very good. Before I conclude and thank everyone, this has been a really good discussion here, and getting so many different perspectives has been amazing. I'm going to ask Lauren to come back and wrap up this event. Lauren?
Thank you, Professor. Thank you to our panelists, and thank you to everyone in the audience for joining us today for our webinar. As a reminder, the recording of this webinar will be made available on our website in the next few days, so keep an eye out. You will receive the link to the recording in a follow-up email along with the survey that we ask you to fill out. Lastly, in this challenging time, Georgetown McDonough is committed to supporting our students in obtaining full-time jobs or internships. If you have an opportunity for a student, whether it be a job, internship, short-term project, or even training and industry insights, please reach out to us at msbalumni@georgetown.edu. Thank you again for joining us.
Thank you very much. It's been great. Thanks to each of you. Yeah, take care. Bye.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.